I mean, that's an interesting comment on our system.
Yeah, because there's a lot more money. There's a lot of money wasted in the CIA, and it gets us into a lot of trouble. But the big money, all the money in the country is manipulated by the Federal Reserve. But on monetary policy, now the new chairman, Barney Frank, told me that he says, I'm looking forward to it because you and I can work together in checking up on the Federal Reserve, which he's more than a Republican would do. So I'm encouraged by that. But Barney Frank is a liberal, and he wants the Fed to have lower interest rates, as a liberal would, and not understanding the whole issue. But where I think we'll make inroads is on more transparency. I think that we might be able to at least publicly pressure the Fed and maybe the working group on financial markets, find out what they're doing, and maybe at least put pressure on them to tell us how central bank coordination is used. I think that's a big secret that nobody even talks about, but I think that's very big. This central bank coordination, and of course the financial markets, the working group on financial markets is big. And here we have Bernanke who talks about transparency. So the first thing he does is takes away transparency. He doesn't even allow us to know what the money supply is doing. Takes away M3.
I find that to be really, really interesting. I was going to ask you about that. I mean, and is that statistic going to come back and be as obvious as it was, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago?
I doubt it. They didn't want it. When I tried to stir up a little interest, I went to friends on both sides, Republican and Democrats, who've been on the banking committee for years and years, and they couldn't have been less interested. Yeah. There was no concern, and they didn't think it was important.
A funny thing's happened, though. M3 is now being calculated externally by the private sector.
Sure it is.
Which means that all that's happened is that the government, or that the Fed has lost control of publishing that number.
That's good.
I think that's definitely good. A question that I have that we've discussed with Jay numerous times on the program is we talk about the fallacy of a monetary system that has no basis. A monetary system that basically is akin to a house of cards.
And the unconstitutionality.
Well, I mean, your friend, you were nice enough to introduce this to Judge Napolitano, and we had a conversation with him about that. And I'm amazed that our monetary system is working. And I guess the question I would have for you, and I use the term working loosely, okay? But let's assume that the monetary system is working right now. I don't believe it can go on ad infinitum, so to speak. I don't think you can have an economy that has a currency that isn't based on something, and our currency is based on nothing.
Well, it's based on an illusion and a false trust, and it can't continue because the trust will eventually be lost. But Mises taught in Human Action that all money originates in the marketplace, so it has to have real value. And the dollar did originate. It originated as a silver dollar and had real value, and there was gold and silver, and throughout the 20th century that was undermined until it was finally totally destroyed in 1971.
Right.
So we've had this total fiat dollar since 1971. You say, well, why didn't it end? Why did it last for 35 more years? Well, it was because of the origination. There are still members, believe this or not, there are still members on the banking committee that believe that the dollar is backed by gold.
You've got to be kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. They still do, and they're very disinterested. But they'll come and say, "Isn't the dollar backed by gold?" Well, no, not quite.
You know that, Jay? I was totally unaware of that.
Well, I know that I found it fascinating that my son in his high school course somewhere along the line was taught that by his teacher. In fact, so
that the dollar is
backed by gold. So it's I think it's a common perception that probably allows confidence in the dollar to be retained.
That's right, and it's a false confidence, and that will be lost. So actually, it's a great benefit to us now. A lot of people who are demanding we change the exchange rates between the yuan and the dollar. They don't realize what's going to happen when the market really takes over. The market eventually will take over, and rule. But for now, we're going to benefit, and we are benefiting, and we're running our welfare and our warfare on borrowed money that we first created out of thin air.
Exactly. Well, here's an interesting question. Okay, basically, economies, at least as I understand it, economies grow because of productivity. Okay, productivity within the economy. Okay, our economy, I maintain, because of statistics that Jay brought up to Paul and I a number of years ago, our economy isn't growing because of increased productivity. Our economy is growing because of an increasing amount of debt on both the personal level and and the governmental level, and basically people are out buying suits and clothes and cars with money they get from, at the risk of being simplistic, refinancing their homes. That can't go on forever. What's going to happen in the next 5 years?
Well, when the government gets involved and they run up this debt, and then it's put out in the economy, the debt eventually gets so high that it's not repayable, and our debt is not repayable.
Of course not.
There's going to be a default, but they won't quit writing checks. They're going to continue to create the credit, and they still remember very well, and you remember the conversation between Bernanke and Friedman, that it was the Fed's fault because they didn't print enough money in the Depression, rather than understanding that it was the Fed printing too much in the 20s. But what happens is they default by the real debt going down in terms of the value of the dollar. So to me, the most important event, and maybe last week was an indicator of the importance of this event, giving us a big sign, that is the dollar is under attack, and it's been under attack, not for a year or two or three, but since World War II. I mean, ever since Bretton Woods, the dollar's doing this, and I just suspect that one day that's going to be a big deal.
You're such as yourself, and I mean that very seriously, is that there is no other country in the world where we can have this conversation openly. There is no other country in the world where Paul and I can have a radio show where we discuss issues like this. There's no other country in the world when someone as prominent, for example, as Judge Andrew Napolitano can put out a book lambasting what's going on in the government. I think that very fact is what's going to allow us to survive what I believe is going to be an incredibly large crisis, as you say, in the very near future.
And there's one other thing. Your radio show and others like this are very important, but it's the internet. Just think about the internet. I have the record for voting for the least amount of regulation of anybody, probably any place in Congress, but especially on the internet. And it's a politically risky vote to take, because my opponent painted me as pro-pornography and pro-gambling because I didn't want to regulate the internet. Of course, I fell back to the old-fashioned belief that maybe parents have something to say about raising kids.
How many kids do you have?
5.
And how many wives? 4 or 5 wives?
I think just one.
One wife, right? Big into pornography, huh? Yeah.
So that was used against me, but the important issue, and I think most people in a conference like this would understand how valuable the internet is, because that's where the information is circulating.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it'd be hard for them to get rid of the internet or gather up our guns or take our gold coins.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen. And they were much more passive in the 30s, but I believe Americans today will not give up their guns, and they will not give up their gold coins, and they're not going to give up their internet, even though we allow our Congress to start into the regulating of the internet for making sure that you're a better person. Make sure you don't gamble and this sort of thing.
I've got to tell you, I can't thank you enough for being here. I think that's a great place to end this. I think it's very important for listeners, folks at this show, to be aware that we do live in the greatest country in the world, and what you're saying is the regulation may exist, but the freedoms will never be lost, and that's what's going to get us through. Congressman Ron Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.